the next panel is actually on inspiring innovation, and the moderator is actually also a colleague of mine, Jannat Maqbool, who most of you will know. And actually, I had the pleasure working with Jannat for the last couple of years, and I think she's one of these people who is so passionate about technology and what it could do to the New Zealand community and economy that she is keeping herself incredibly busy. So besides being a principal advisor at Ecosystm, she's also a senior academic staff member at the Waikato Institute of Technology. She's the organizer of the Waikato Tech Meetup, a working group member of FinTech New Zealand and AI Forum New Zealand, Smart City advisor to Hamilton City Council, and project lead for Te Waka, Waikato's Regional Economic Development Board. So, and besides that, she actually has a family with kids and she looks after as well. So please welcome Jannat Maqbool.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that, Uli. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to start off with, you obviously know who I am now, but I'm going to start off with just a little bit of a, we've just had afternoon tea, so a little bit of a wake up. Who's inspired already? Who's been here all day or most of the day and is inspired to either walk out the door with a great new idea or an opportunity for a partnership, a collaboration, different way of thinking, a different approach? Who's already inspired? Hands up, everybody. Our job is done, let's go. Because we've just inspired the innovation ecosystem for financial services in New Zealand with just this one event, with this cross-sector involvement and this partnership between a number of organisations to bring this together. So we're going to talk about inspiring innovation in financial services. We're going to talk about what this actually looks like for New Zealand as a little player in the bottom of the world. That actually, I'm an Australian, so it's all right for me to say this. We're going to talk about it from the perspective of, for example, when JFK said in 1962 that we're going to go to the moon in a decade, and then suddenly, bang, everything aligned and people were inspired to make it happen. Apparently they did. So we're going to talk about that and what is the next big or the big opportunity for New Zealand, and is it that actually we do financial, we break the mold and we do financial technology innovation in a whole new a way that actually benefits everyone. So I'll ask now for the panellists to introduce themselves and the role that they play in the financial technology innovation ecosystem in New Zealand, please. Anyone? Going once,
you're in charge,
going twice.
Okay.
Sorry, Serge.
I'm Serge Van Dam. I'm an active, hands-on investor, director in a variety of early-stage companies. Most of them are skewed towards financial services, or software for financial services. So FinTech in the software sense of FinTech. And I was involved for 10 years in, I guess, inventing and taking mobile banking to the world in a company called MCOM, which we sold in 2011. So.
Brooke?
Cool. Kia ora, I'm Brooke, one of the co-founders, it was 7 of us, of Sharesies. So Sharesies is our online investment platform that's made it really fun and easy to get into investing in New Zealand with a minimum investment of 1 cent, and we brought that to New Zealand, which is pretty cool.
Fantastic. Yep, big fan of Sharesies. So I'm Brett Holland. I'm the GM of Innovation Services for CreativeHQ, and we're the organization that runs the Kiwi FinTech Accelerator. We've done that. We're in the 3rd year of that. I'll be the first to admit I'm not a financial services expert. I'm more of a generalist, but we run a lot of programs, and the one that we've done in the FinTech world has been a really interesting one that I'd love to share about. So,
Aisha?
Is it on? Or do you just talk?
Just go.
Tēnā tātou e te huare. Sorry, there's a bit of feedback now. My name's Aisha Ross. I'm the Director of Innovation and Business Growth at Wananga, Aotearoa. We're the 2nd largest tertiary provider in the country. We've just probably very early stages into supporting Māori startups and Māori entrepreneurs on their sort of entrepreneurial journeys. Really just really keen to participate in today's discussion and add some value if I can. Certainly humbled to be on a panel with such fantastic minds. So, tēnā tātou i te whare.
Great, thank you. Right, and I definitely am keen to have some questions from the floor. Would you guys agree at some point? But we do have some that we have prepared, or I've prepared, and they're just winging it with me. So starting off, so a little bit of each of them comes with a bit of a blurb and then a question. So inspiring innovation takes more than bright ideas, and at its core, it is about change. Solving old problems with new solutions, utilizing technology can be an aspect, improving economic and societal outcomes. A culture of innovation is a mindset that creatively embraces change as an opportunity. Are we on the right track, doing the right things in New Zealand when it comes to innovation in the financial services sector? Anybody?
You're in charge, Jannat. Just
Stop
remember
doing that. Okay, all right, Serge.
Well, I mean, I look at it, I guess, from the entrepreneurial side. As an investor, I think if you look at I did this the other day, I'm putting together a periodic table of early stage companies that are going global. 20-odd% of the fastest growing software companies in New Zealand are in financial services. So we're disproportionately investing in financial services. Now, that doesn't necessarily directly answer your question, but from an ecosystem perspective in terms of software companies, there is a very significant amount of activity of companies taking innovations from New Zealand to the world. And I think the real reason why that's the case, we can talk about the inventiveness of Kiwis and all that sort of carry on, but the reality is that it's relatively easy to convince a bank or a financial institution to try something new. Compared to the rest of the world, it's still very painful, as probably most of us are aware, but compared to the rest of the world, it's actually a lot easier to try things here. And so you try them here, and Anand's sitting over there. He was a customer of ours in the mobile banking domain in 2004. So you try it here, and then you can go and take it to the rest of the world. So I think in that sense, the ecosystem is very healthy. I think it's quite different to sort of the actual direct financial services sort of thing that Brooke can talk about.
Yeah,
Great.
I think in New Zealand there's just so much opportunity to make money a lot easier for people and more inclusive. And I think Kay touched on some aspects of around really creating more collective arrangements with money too. And so that's quite exciting. So there's heaps and heaps of areas to create innovation and change in the financial sector, which is really exciting. And I think, as Serge was saying, the ecosystem is really up for that. When we first started, I was so surprised at how many doors were just open to us at all of the large companies, and all of the C-suite were just really keen to connect and see what they could learn from us, but also just keen to experiment, and it was really good to see that. But yeah, there's so much more to do. Yeah.
No, I agree with that. There's always more to do. But to echo what was said, there is a lot going on right now. And I think the ecosystem that you have in a small nation like New Zealand, when they do work together, is a very good place to start. So we saw, and you experienced this, Brooke, in the program, that, for instance, like the FMA can get involved and work closely with the innovators instead of creating like a regulatory sandbox that can have its problems and you can move in a direction and it may not come to fruition. What they would rather do is, well, let's work closely. Let's learn together. And because it's not a huge ecosystem, you don't have so many players that they got to keep track of, they can actually do that. And we've seen them do that in all the programs that we run. We also see the banks, all the partners that we do work with, and the other ecosystem players, the insurance companies, want to work with the companies. They want to explore. They use curiosity as their guide, not fear necessarily, which is great. So you see a lot of the characteristics that you want to see in a healthy ecosystem. It's just, can we do it at scale, and can we create more of the entities that can solve some of the larger problems here in New Zealand that are scalable? We'll see as we go.
Aisha.
Yeah, I was just going to, like they said, no, that's a joke. Look, I think I guess from my perspective is that a lot of the young Māori innovators of today are really, they operate off the shoulders of, our tupuna, those before us, so we take an intergenerational sort of view on what we do. So therefore, we sort of look behind to look at the present, to think about the future. And, it's a real, there's a sense of comfort, I guess, and confidence that comes with that. But I guess in today's present times, you can see that the ecosystem is super healthy. And there's a lot of players across the country in our space, say, around building capability, making the connections, navigating the ecosystem, all of the variable components that make up the ecosystem are certainly well supported in today's context. So I'd agree with the rest of the panel in that respect.
So in that regard, so if you think about being more inclusive here in New Zealand, so with the agritech, from an agritech lens, the focus for the country at the moment, and I'm just throwing this in now, this is me ad-libbing or whatever it's called. With the agritech focus, it's think about how can agritech innovation be for New Zealand, but also for the world. So in a financial technology innovation space, how do we ensure that inclusive thinking is actually inclusive thinking for the market, and is the market local or global? Is it an approach as opposed to specific types of thinking? Is it just an approach that then that works globally as well, if that was your market?
I think it's interesting because the majority of fintechs in New Zealand are B2B, and hearing from Singapore the other day too, that's the case in that market, maybe because the number of players and the opportunity there. So from if you really want to get inclusion, that's mostly, well, that's where B2C and all the real change needs to happen at a consumer level. And so I think when there's more happening in that space in New Zealand, then there's probably more impetus for government to help and get involved. I know that there's a lot that the Financial Markets Authority is doing in terms of creating better customer outcomes and making sure that banks and financial institutions are really caring about that. But innovation really needs to drive that. And I think, and looking at problems differently and really bringing a customer-centric view from day one.
Well, I think on that particular point was something that the previous panel touched on, Marie, you know, in terms of, particularly if I think about it through a Māori consumer point, highly consumer-driven, you know, so therefore there's an ethics point and values point in terms of what might happen and occur in the fintech space to ensure that, you know, the end user is supported to make the right choices.
So how do you...
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, so for us, when we run a program and we're trying to draw interest from innovators to come in and do it, we always think, well, what differentiates us? And we have to think of it as a country, right? So what is it about New Zealand that you'd come to New Zealand to do work on a fintech company? I mean, we're not a big fintech ecosystem like Singapore or London, or, you know. So you wouldn't come because there's all kinds of activity here. But you'd come, I mean, one of the big things that you have here is just this ethic of looking out after each other. I mean, and we see it with the wellness budget, and we see it with the initiatives that are going on. This ethic of we want to be inclusive, you know, we want to look out after well-being, right? And we see that with, you know, a lot of the companies that are coming in that are interested in New Zealand and interested in the program, is that, you know, the entrepreneurs themselves have a real social mind to them, right? And I think that does make this ecosystem stand out. And I think that that's where the potential has to really build to you know, address some of the issues and create companies that have scale globally, because those aren't unique issues to New Zealand, being inclusive in the financial sector. So I'm encouraged to see more of that, and I want to, you know, see the ecosystem support that and really, you know, challenge each other. Are we being inclusive?
Yeah, I'd take a slightly different angle. I think that if you're really passionate about inclusion, then the single biggest thing you can do is make services really easy to use. So I'm pretty sure when Facebook, you know, they decided on their global expansion strategy, they didn't think about inclusion and have an inclusive service. They just said, how do we make this thing so simple that anyone can use it? And I think that mindset is not universally the case in financial services, but the organisations that will win, hopefully the likes of Sharesies, will do so not because they focused on inclusion as a value, but because they just made it so easy. So if I look at the kind of companies I'm involved in, like Journey, we do a chat bot for buying insurance in 4 minutes. You know, the reason we'll win, the reason why the service would be available to any consumer in a society who's somewhat literate, is not because we focused on inclusion, but because we just made it so damn easy. And I actually think that's the best lever we have as an ecosystem in terms of innovation to drive up inclusion, is just make stuff easy.
So it's an approach, isn't it, rather than a specific thing to, like,
Exactly.
Everyone's always about design thinking and about post-it notes and all that. So it's like, just include the right people, communicate, and be sort of clear, sort of a little bit of clarity around where you're going. So one of the something sort of relates to the consumer perspective and why we're all in this and what they're sort of potentially the impact on consumers. So I read something yesterday which was sort of a bit alarming, but tied in. So it was a story about payments and innovation in the payment space, and so someone in this story said tied in. It's the whole point of it is tied in with the psychology of consumerism. The intention is to remove the consumer from the physical symbols of cash, so that there's no lower purchase inhibition, so that they spend more money. So they're just going ka-ching, ka-ching, and they're actually not seeing the money coming out of their wallet or whatever. So they talked about the consumer needing to be in a position where they're, it's like McDonald's and we control whether we eat too much or less or whatever, and actually the onus is on us. But how do we do that in a financial services space? And is the onus really on the consumer to keep an eye on their money when it is now so easy to move it around, to spend it? So what is it that we need to do potentially? Is this what we need to do? Is consider that perspective in our design of the innovation process, in our design of the product, and in our deployment, is to consider that. And what does that even look like? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think I want to pick up a little bit about what you're saying too, Aisha, is that with Sharesies, when we think about the investors we bring on, there's three ways. We don't, access is really important, that people have equal opportunities to access and develop their wealth. That's something that heaps of people, there's wealth management systems out there, but not really for wealth development. So access is really important, but we've always seen that as just one aspect. Now, once you have an investor in, we really feel we want to help them build their confidence and motivation, and through, and even if they're not investing in us, making sure we're building education into everything we do. We do that in our design. It's just intuitive. We remove as much jargon as possible, make it seamless for people to just use everyday language. I think we do in finance have built up all this rhetoric around us that makes it sound really complex and hard, but it's actually quite simple, and the most simplest investment philosophies outperform over time. So it's just bringing it back to that and helping people feel like confident in those kind of investment strategies. So for us, we always look at it around access, confidence, and motivation for that person, and making sure that we'll continually build that into how we design and how we help investors actually grow their wealth.
Great.
To me, like most things in life, like health, the not needing an ambulance at the bottom of the cliff just comes down to education. So I think regardless of as an ecosystem, maybe you're in the education sector directly, but it doesn't matter what we do and the tech that we're building for financial services. The reality is financial literacy and understanding things like compound interest and those sort of things, which seem really boring, are really the recipe for avoiding some of the pitfalls you talk about. Again, the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff is likely going to be regulation and to some extent artificial intelligence, which can allow you to control, to use robots to enforce that regulatory scheme, which you can do now quite effectively. But the reality is, if we want to avoid those pitfalls in the first place, we have to have educated citizens.
Okay.
Well, and I like seeing that there's innovation in education too. You take Banker, for instance, and going into the schools, and really good, innovative solution from a fantastic young entrepreneur that's trying to make a dent at financial education, right? And I get I guess the fortunate position to see young entrepreneurs taking on challenges, and the mindset that you see here is encouraging. I mean, we've got of the FinTech programs that we've run, I can think of 3 teams, and Michelle, you can probably even think of more, that have a specific focus of looking at, there's a lot of money to be made off of money, right? But how much of that goes to places that you would want it to go to? So there's, these companies are looking at how do we, take things like, claiming some of your donations, and taking the claim off of that and re-channeling it back into investments into charities, things like that. I mean, there are 3 companies that are really focused on, how do we siphon some of that into charitable causes or meaningful causes that really channel money into places that we as citizens, as participants in this, want to channel money into, right? So thinking about it holistically as to well, can, the money that flows through the system actually be a little bit deployed into things that we want to, continue to build in the society? I mean, that type of thinking encourages me. I mean, so innovation in that type of, solution thinking really does encourage me.
So just in addition to that, I think that's a really good segue into that there are broader success metrics than profitability. So, which is something that we're certainly very interested in broadening the business model to ensure that it's not so that profitability is one particular measure of success, but certainly so is the level of social and cultural and environmental impact that your venture may have. So we certainly are focused on trying to figure out what that might be for some of the ventures that we support, to ensure that they've got a point of difference in quite a competitive market or whatever it might be. So and therefore there's also a responsibility at our side to be talking to the investment community around what that might look like, and trying to bring them on that, on that journey with us as well.
Yes, you can.
Sorry. So, yeah, totally agree with what you're saying. So Sharesies is the first financial services company in New Zealand that's a B Corp, and that means that we've gone through the certification and audited process to show that we're making a positive impact on our community, our customers, the environment, our people, and then also have great governance structures in place. And I really believe in what he's saying there, and it's what you were touching on too, that the FinTechs coming, or the organisations that are next in line, really value that at the core of why they want to exist. And I'm really excited about that, and I think that's going to really disrupt what how people consume financial services and where they want to spend their money, and know that that's doing good while they're doing good. So really excited about that change.
How do we take that then? So what you've done and the way that you think and the approach, let's say, and how do we then inspire others to do something similar? Not the product out there, not the market that you were looking at, but the approach that you're taking. So do you bring it back into your programs and your incubators from this perspective? Do you think about it from an investment perspective, so investment is tied into somehow inspiring that mindset when we're talking about innovation in the financial technology space?
Well, I mean, success is the answer to that question. Like if Brooke's
really
initiative
successful.
fails, then it doesn't really matter if they're successful. And one of the key attributes is their sustainable approach to financial services, then that should inspire others. I'm involved in a company called Kogo. We're one of the first, probably the first social enterprise deployed in the open banking scheme in the UK. Our entire purpose is using banking data to improve sustainability goals of our users. We will launch some financial services on the back of that, probably in the second half of next year. We expect those to be wildly successful. Now, if consumers don't really care, and they don't care who they get their credit card from or whatever, then we will have failed. But if we're wildly successful, then all it will mean is more organisations and startups and ecosystem participants will emulate that. So it just comes down to you, Brooke, and being successful.
So everybody
No
now
pressure.
invest in Sharesies at sharesies.com.
But it also goes back to how you measure success, you know?
Right.
And making sure you're measuring success with all of that in mind, not just,
So we do have something in New Zealand that's working. We've talked about, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of different players. We're doing some really cool things that are really innovative in the true sense of the word. We need to keep it going. We need to have more of it. Yes, no, and then again back to that conversation about, do we take on the world, and is that our uniqueness? Is that our proposition? I'm an Australian, remember, so I always want Australia to do better. So yes, so what is our inspiring innovation? So we're doing well. We've got a model. Is it perfect? And do we and how do we then scale the model locally and then go global? Is that what we want to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, from my point of view in the world, it's block and tackling, right? I mean, you've got to have people who are willing to take the journey, the Brookes of the world. You've got to make sure that they take a disciplined approach. They've got to find a problem that's worth solving. They've got to figure out who has it. They've got to solve it for them. and then figure out how to scale that, right? It sounds simple, but it's not simple at all, right? And ultimately, if we as an ecosystem continue to support that, if the institutions continue to support the innovators, both inside their institutions as well as outside their institutions, and we see a good sign that they are. I mean, everywhere we look, we see a lot of support programs from, I specifically say the banks. Obviously, Kiwi Bank is a big one that we work with the Kiwi FinTech Accelerator, but the other banks have other support mechanisms out there for the innovators. We know that a lot of activity is going on inside their institutions as well, but it's still, you've got to keep that discipline of process to keep chipping away at, how we can solve some of the problems that exist out there, identify them, and figure out how to solve them.
And I'm going to ask you a question now directly, but anyone can answer it. You don't give the people in the accelerator the idea, do you?
Not at all.
Do you connect them with experiences that then they come up with an idea, or do they come in with the idea? And should we be doing more of the former, connecting them with experiences that drive innovation, or is there?
It's interesting. I don't think the world is short on ideas.
Okay.
It's not, right?
The right ideas.
and truly, it's not ideas
No.
that make for Sharesies, right? I'm sure there was an idea originally.
Sonia? Yeah.
Yeah. But ultimately, that's what 1/10 of 100th of 1% of what Sharesies is the idea. So, I mean, I think that, and to answer your question, all the ideas come to us for the program, but ultimately, that you're a long way from solving a problem with an idea and getting investment.
I totally reiterate that. We don't have to tell founders of disruptive companies what problems to solve. They've all thought of 1,000 of them. They've just got to decide which one they're going to apply 10 years of their life to solve, And they're all different ones, Mike at Journeys, it doesn't have to be that, why is insurance filling out forms, and why does it take, why is it so hard? It shouldn't be that hard. If I take someone like Ben at Kogo, he goes, I want to know whether my spending is on ethical businesses or not. It shouldn't be that hard. And then, as Brett's point, which is, then it's all about execution. It's all, he used blocking and tackling, which is an American football analogy, line-outs and scrums in this part of the world. But, supporting entrepreneurs through the basics of building a business that's scalable and sustainable. So, and we talked earlier about, profitability isn't the only measure, but you do have to get to scale to have a viable business. You can't have 6 customers paying you $12 each a year and hope to run a business. You need scale. Scale requires you to do a whole lot of business basics, really.
I was going to open it up to the floor, and if you wanted to add something.
Oh, no, no, that's good.
Any questions from the floor? We've got Uli and one at the back, Tim.
Thank you. A question for Brooke. It's really awesome that you've become B Corp, but what really alarms me is that you're the only first FinTech to be B Corp. Can you give us a bit more background as to why that's the case? Is there a cultural issue there, or is it just too early or too new?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's probably a hybrid of both. So globally, there's amazing fintechs like Patagonia and Allbirds, and there are some financial institutions globally, but not massive. But I think if you look at what's coming out of the Financial Markets Authority at the moment, and obviously what came out of Australia, that the B Corp values, or having a real impact, really caring about the impact of your business, might have really shone on the purpose statement, but not actually in the practices of the company. So maybe they've tried and they haven't met the bar before, but I think there should be, and there will be, I hope, a fundamental shift there, where, and I hope that we see more. It would be amazing. Yeah, and we're seeing, so Kathmandu, New Zealand's first listed company, to become a B Corp, there's definitely heaps of traction, and yeah, I'm quite excited about that.
I might add, I mean, this isn't easy to do, right? I mean, it's a testament to Sharesies and how, kind of well run and how well structured a company they are. This is a non-trivial exercise to be a B Corp. So it's got to be very well thought out, and it's got to be, core to your business. And I don't know if, I mean, there are probably companies that would be good candidates that probably haven't come to the point that you guys are. So
It's really hard to retrofit. It's like doing integrated, like one aspect of it might be doing like a company moving from annual reports to integrated reporting. They find, once you want to start doing integrated reporting, you actually realize you need to have integrated thinking, and then you have to change the structures of the company to make sure you're set up for that. And I think that's, like I know people who are really keen to become a B Corp, but they've got like a 2-year journey to really transform how they work internally to make sure that they are driving their business for impact.
So in an innovation ecosystem incubator sense, we should build that thinking into the process, really. Yeah, and that's what we should be thinking, perhaps from your perspective,
Sounds like it's
Aisha.
coming anyway through the entrepreneurs.
put the
that come.
responsibility on us, huh?
Yeah.
I agree.
But again, success is really important because, like if you look at, say, the super funds or the, like Simplicity in New Zealand has a pretty ethical anchoring point, and they're the fastest growing KiwiSaver fund, right? And so you ultimately need those kind of stories, and obviously you guys are growing at an incredible pace. So it's the success that actually will create a reinforcing cycle function. Unless we have that, then it's just kind of words on a website, And so it is really, really important that the companies that have taken the plunge and made sustainability and ethics a core part of their proposition, that they succeed at scale. And I feel really optimistic about what's happening in the financial services sector in that regard. I actually think the financial services sector, regardless of its heritage, is actually in really good shape because they're taking it seriously and seeing the impact compared to, say, manufacturing or specialised services and so on.
We need the stories, though, don't we? So the stories need to be out there, being told to the right people, and the right people really is everyone. So we need to get better, yes, no, at that. The storytelling and actually getting out to this. So if you think about where innovation's taking place and where there must be some statistics on this, and where is it coming from? Is it the big cities more than regional New Zealand? And how do we actually, or is it the other way around? I don't know. But it has to be to everybody. And how do we, so for example, the Kiwi FinTech Accelerator is now in Wellington and in Invercargill this year.
And in Auckland.
So how do we, Wellington and obviously Auckland. So let's bring that to Waikato.
We can talk. Did you hear that, Anand?
Hey, don't we, Aisha? That's what we want to do, eh? That's what we're going to do. But we do, as a nation, I think we need to do more around that. So another question from the floor, up the back there, Kay Marie. This has been pre-prepared. Good luck.
Kia ora. This is a question for the two gentlemen in the middle, Brett and Aisha. In regards to capital, so, I'm conflicted because I've been able to garner the benefits of being in the incubation programs delivered by CreativeHQ. But do you feel, both of you, that if you had access to capital to be able to invest in businesses that you see have promise, rather than enterprises having to pitch, they could still pitch, but the fact that you get a choice because you get to see our growth and our journey over a period of time, if you were equipped with your own capital fund, do you think that that would be empowering, but also be a signal to the sector to actually help invest in you to help make those decisions?
It's a good question, Kay. It's interesting because, I can take a stab at that. Ultimately, we like to stick to our knitting, and that's helping companies. We like the fact that there are good investors out there, like Serge, that know what to look for in companies. We tend to work very closely with them. I like to think that they do kind of take signal from companies that are coming through the program, and most of the investors that are, especially lead investors in companies, will get involved pretty heavily with the teams in the programs. So I don't know as we need to have our own capital to continue to deploy to make that signal. But it's an interesting question. I know the Ice House guys are more closely tied with capital themselves through their programs. So. Aisha?
Yeah, well, there's pros and cons with it, right? I think if you work with the investment community or the group of investors that are well aligned from a values and outcomes perspective, then I don't think you necessarily need to have your own venture fund as such. But that said, you know, like if that didn't exist, then it might beg the question to create that. But again, you know, I mean, there's more smarter minds that, you know, like in the investment VC or angel sort of space that are moving more towards more broader success metrics, like the earlier conversation. So therefore, you know, you'd hitch with them and make sure that they're well and truly integrated as such into you know the talent or the venture pipeline that you're creating.
I mean, I got to add just real quickly, one thing I didn't mention is, I mean, there's a lot of talk in New Zealand about you know, gaps in the capital, but you know, in the early stage where we play, I think it's a very robust capital environment. It's the growth. You know, when you get into growth and you're looking to expand and go overseas, that I think you get into the gaps in capital. But it's great to have seen, since I've been in New Zealand 7 years now, the growth that's happened in the early stage of capital and the diversity now that's really happening across the early stage capital in New Zealand.
I think it's interesting because obviously Sharesies went through an accelerator. I would have thought that you'd hope that through going through the accelerator, companies are de-risked to a point that like investors are just flocking to those companies because, you know, they've built that profile, and we saw that with the accelerator, right? There were heaps of investors there that were keen. I think the biggest thing an accelerator I'd like to see more of in the startup community is way more support on making sure that founders are getting founder-friendly terms. And, you know, like we were really fortunate to be able to navigate those conversations given our experience, but seeing like a 2-person engineer team get some terrible terms, it means their business is dead the next time they want to do a round. That really worries me, and so making sure that there's like a really friendly investor community and that accelerators are helping those startups really understand the flow-on impacts of the terms they can sign up to early on. Yeah.
Anything to add, Serge, from what they said?
What they said, yeah, what they said.
Ditto. We've got a question from James. Go.
Yeah, I mean, from my point of view, I mean, the reality is there's a lot of inspirational innovation take place. I remember down at the Hamilton session a couple of months ago, and there's a 7-year-old kid who developed an AR VR program because some of his classmates had disability and functionality, and he thought through AR and VR actually that would help. But I suppose my question is, how do we get the message out? So if we're thinking about this partnership with Singapore, is there a mechanism actually to take the likes of Sharesies and actually profile them actually in a different jurisdiction where we're actually, you know, sharing the success? Because I think sometimes the humbling Kiwi nature actually is a bit of a barrier because we don't always like to shout from the rooftops, and we could also do that then back from Singapore into to New Zealand. So I suppose to the panel and maybe to Brett, with the sort of the companies coming through the program and obviously the great work that you guys are doing, is there an opportunity to case study that and then profile that locally as well as globally?
Yeah, no, there's definitely opportunity, and I love seeing this forum for that reason, right? And we've got quite a few of the teams in the program in the audience. I can see familiar faces, and I think that we'd be happy to build those relationships up and work with the likes of FinTech New Zealand as well to help, you know, figure out what is the most effective mechanism to not only open the doors for the FinTech companies that are interested in Singapore and that market, but also vice versa. Like we were talking about, what are the things that would be interesting to Singapore-based companies to come to New Zealand and trial, and what are the things that we promote? I mean, I like I said, I'm a fan of wellness and inclusivity and diversity, and it's a great market for that, and it's a great market for trialing things that are a bit out there because of the attitude of the regulators and the attitude of the institutions. So maybe you take things that are a little bit more experimental, even still, and bring them to New Zealand. So
I'd add, well, I guess I'd agree with you on the cultural issue, which is, you know, probably half of the successful exits from technology-related companies in New Zealand in the last decade have been in financial services, but most people wouldn't know who any of them are, nor do they want to shout from the rooftops, nor do they want to be on the rich list and so on. So you've got this kind of cultural issue where there's a lack of boasting by essentially relatively invisible businesses. And the other side of that is we've got a communication challenge. If you ask my mum what I do for a living, she'd just tell you that I'm involved with tech companies, and then you kind of go, what kind of tech companies? She'll go, kind of tech companies, you know. And FinTech, to the average citizen showing up to a town hall in Levin or wherever the average citizen hangs out, wouldn't really know what FinTech is. So we do have a communication problem as well. Everyone here knows what FinTech is, but it's pretty hard to communicate to the public. So we've got a communication challenge too.
I think I'm quite excited that there's events like this and that, you know, SOPs come over and as a regulator and really helping embrace fintechs in New Zealand and being able to share that learning is really exciting. You know, I'm definitely turning my mind to how we go global, and as a B2C, it is quite different to B2B. But you know, and that is exciting, and I think NZTE have been fantastic too in terms of helping create connections and both from an investor perspective, but you know, I'm really excited about how it can come together. It still feels murky and it still doesn't feel clear yet, but I'm looking forward to getting the clarity. But it's really good that there's events like this in our own backyard, which is really exciting.
Yeah, no, we started with that, didn't we? Because in the room, most of the people put up their hand and said we're inspired, and I think it is. And through my own, you know, sort of conversations with people, we do need more of this. We need more getting out there, and that was my point around how do we take everybody with us, and the everybody with us is great stories to where they need to be told, and in a way that actually is consumable. And then the discussion around how do we connect with the rest of the world, because we are the way we approach things now, and maybe we are a test. You know, an opportunity to test ways of doing things, but also solutions. And then going back to the whole how to go global. Two examples of that is the quarter of the world's population is Muslim, and I know you and I have talked about it. So why can't Sharesies work the way it needs to work for that? And then the conversation around insurance and scaling that. A quarter of the world's population doesn't use insurance. So do we create something for that quarter of the world's population, and is that a market? Because if you leave the people that are in that market to do that innovation, that's not real innovation. It requires fresh thinking. So some things to think about. But thank you very much. We've run out of time. I've already gone over. No, we've got a question. Hang on a minute. No, Hayley's got a question.
I actually don't have a question. Wow, that's really
statement.
loud. I just want to, I like the storytelling conversation. I would go home and not sleep if I don't add to this. 2.5 years ago in Singapore, I had a conference call with an ecosystem with a lot of you in the room saying, we're not telling enough stories about our fintech. And that came from a conversation with Rod Jury. Him and I had a sandwich and we created a concept called the bridge between Singapore and New Zealand. And why would I go to Singapore from the New Zealand angle? And you have tech from Singapore was just where we began a tech strategy. It's been 2.5 years. I feel very emotional because today is kind of like, wow, New Zealand and Singapore are talking. We talked across investors, we talked across customers, we talked across our own internal people. And the storytelling is critical. And get over this humble story. It doesn't serve you in the market. You know, stand up together when you are in Singapore or anywhere. If you have conference opportunities like this, get someone that is not from America, that is not from Australia, and that is not from the UK to speak. I'm sorry. We've got to start hearing from markets such as Southeast Asia, Singapore. We've got Hui Win here from Enterprise Singapore. It is time for us to, we're talking a lot about New Zealand today. Get on the plane. Get on the plane. You know, go and see. Rod Jury's words to me that day was, get on a plane early, get over to places such as Singapore and see if you stack up. If you stack up, great. And if you don't, go home and decide if you can find enough energy to pick up where you need to be in the world. I'm so passionate about New Zealand tech. It will be our second biggest export, and let's get ready for it, and we will do it by collaborating with countries such as Singapore. We do not need to be the whole solution. That model is over. You know, it's about capability ecosystems, and let's get really, really proud of the capability we have, and how do we go and inject ourselves into other ecosystems to solve sort of bigger problems. So had to take this opportunity to say, yay, you guys are amazing, and also let's get tech and services added to our narrative globally, because the rolling hills are important, but we are so much more. And all of you have the stories to tell. In Singapore, yeah. Thanks, guys.
No bias there, because Singapore's sitting in the room. But just if I can add to that, and when she met everybody on this year, is everyone being able to tell their story. So I think from it has to be everybody that's doing really cool things, and that humbleness has to move aside, and they have to be able to, and so that's reaching into the pockets of New Zealand to find that brilliance and bringing that out. But thank you, panel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, audience.
Huge, yes.